Hello, this is going to be a quick tutorial on how to set up Kontakt with multimbral or multiple outputs in Pro Tools. I'm doing this in the latest version of Pro Tools, currently 2020.11 and Kontakt 6 point something, but this should work all the way back at least till Pro Tools 12 and definitely with Kontakt 5 as well. There are a number of advantages why we'd want to set this up, and I'm going to go through those as I set it up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a bunch of stereo instrument tracks here. Let's do 5. And on the first one of these, I'm going to insert a single instance of Kontakt. And here we can now insert a patch. So let's go with these music boxes. They're from Sonic and they're free. I really recommend them. And if I play on my MIDI controller, you should be able to hear them. No, you can't, because I need to go to record enable. Now you should be able to hear them. So that is correct. You can, however, in Kontakt, as you may know, load in a whole bunch of patches. So we have this piano, for instance, that we can do. That's taking a second. This one is also from Sonic. Let's load up the Yankin here, that Solitude Bliss, for instance. And let's do some non-Kontakt player libraries as well. So just to show that this works as well. Let's do the 8-dio flugelhorn, for instance, here. And let's do one more. We have another track, so let's get some percussion. Maybe the Strezov taikos here. And so what we'd ideally like to achieve with this setup is to route each of these patches through its own instrument track so that we can record and play them out separately. There are a number of advantages as to why you'd want to do this. You can save a whole bunch of system memory, as you would see up here. This also would let you save a multi, as in I could save all of these instruments together as a Kontakt multi, and then if I went to a different session, I could just load that up again without having to, with all my settings and everything, without having to do that from scratch every single time. There's sort of two parts to this, and the way that you really have to think about it is simply routing from inputs, where is the data coming from, and then the outputs, where are we going to send the audio to. Now, the first part of this is really quite easy. All the MIDI data comes in on separate MIDI channels. As you can see, Kontakt actually also numbers these as you load them in. So the first one's on MIDI channel 1, the piano is on MIDI channel 2, 3, 4, and 5, and so on. And we can set a corresponding MIDI channel. We can link these up in our instrument tracks. So if I'll actually rename these just to make it really clear. So this is going to be our music boxes. Then we have the piano, the Yankin, that's not how you spell it, the flugelhorn, and lastly the taikos. So what we need to do is we need to come over here to our instrument panel, which I've got mine showing here, but if it isn't, you just come to the drop down here and you can select it from there. And it will let us set the instrument input. So clicking this button here, it sees our Kontakt instance and we can send the MIDI data from here to channel 2 in Kontakt. You can see the track is now become sort of like an active gray color, which means if we go to record, you should be able to see this and hear it coming through MIDI channel 2. My MIDI controller, by the way, is just set to all channels at the moment, but you can of course make this specific as well. Let's just do this for the rest of our instruments as well. So this, the Yankin, is going to come in on channel 3, the flugelhorn on channel 4, and the taikos on channel 5. And just to check that they are working, sounds like I would need to do some volume matching there, but it works. And lastly, the taikos. Yeah, that's also working. However, what you will notice is while the MIDI data is being captured on the correct track, so you can see the taikos here, the audio is still coming out up here in the music boxes track. And so what we'd like to do is we'd like to route the audio from here to these other output tracks. So what I'm going to do, and this is a little more involved, is I'm just going to hide the keyboards here and bring up this panel called Outputs. And these are essentially routing, they're like aux tracks or routing buses or something in Pro Tools, but they're within the plugin of Kontakt itself. The default selection, you might see something a little different. I've already changed this before, but we're going to redo it again from scratch. What we essentially need to do is we need to set up an output for each of these patches, an individual output, because as you'll be able to see, at the moment they're all going through stereo 1. So the piano going through stereo 1, same for the flugelhorn, and so on. There is a batch function in Kontakt, which if you click here and then go to batch functions, it's called rename output section channels according to assigned instruments. This doesn't always work, and as you can see right now, it hasn't worked. It's simply renamed stereo 1 to music boxes. I'm just going to name it back. I honestly don't know if I'm doing something wrong or why this is. Maybe it's a bug. Who knows? We can do it manually, however, and it's quite easy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to this plus here, and I can create some more outputs. So we have 5 instruments, so let's create 4 more stereo outputs. And what we now need to do, we can say which output these patches are supposed to be going to up here. So we can set the Hammersmith to stereo 2, the Yankin to say stereo 3, stereo 4, and stereo 5. You can of course also gang these together if you're working in a particular way. You want 2 instruments or however many to always come out of the same output. For this example, we're just going to separate all of them. However, at this point, we're not yet going to have any audio. You'll see, so I've got the piano in record here, you'll see it's coming through on stereo 2, but this is not connected to anything yet. So we need to connect these to physical outputs. You can see that stereo 1 is connected to output 1 and 2. If we click here in stereo 2, we can connect these outputs. They're not named correctly, and I'm honestly not sure why. I think it might be because we'd have to restart Pro Tools, and we'll have to do that in a little bit anyway. But I can connect it to plugin out 3 and 4, which is correct, in this case aux 1 and 2. And yes, it says now, for the changes to become effective, please close and reopen your session. I find that actually you don't just have to reopen the session, you have to quit Pro Tools and go in again. But before we do that, let's just connect up these others. So this is going to be aux 2, out 5 and 6, out 7 and 8, and out 9 and 10. And now these should all be going through to the right places. Exactly. What we need to do at this point, because we're not hearing any audio, but before we can connect these up in Pro Tools, we need to restart Pro Tools. But before we do that, I'm just going to recommend that you save this output, these outputs that you've just made as a preset, so you can get back at them. And we're going to call this testing. And we're also going to set this as the default. So save current output section state as the default. Well, we're in Pro Tools, so it would be the AX plugin, but I'm just going to do it for all formats. So you could see it in, you could bring this into Logic or Cubase or whatever as well. So yes, I'm now just going to save, and I'm going to quit out of Pro Tools, and then I will see you in a sec. And we are back in Pro Tools. The patches are just loading in all the samples, but apart from that, everything is back correct and present. All of our outputs are there. The only other thing we need to do now is to route these physical outputs from the Kontakt outputs to the inputs in Pro Tools. So if we come here to the piano on the I/O section, we go to the inputs, if we go to plugin, it will see the Kontakt instance and it will see those outputs that we created. So let's connect piano up to stereo 2. And if I go to record, enable and play on my MIDI controller, we should hear and you can now see that the audio is being correctly routed through the piano. Just doing the rest for these. So the Janken is going to go to stereo 3. Flugelhorn to stereo 4, and the taikos to stereo 5, and just to test all those. So that is now all working correctly. You'll notice that you can only ever route from stereo 2 in this case. You can never route stereo 1. That's because stereo 1 always defaults to the track that you've actually inserted Kontakt on. You'll see here the plugin, the input it's actually grayed out altogether. So what you would do if, say you wanted to completely separate your Kontakt instance, you didn't want to actually load any MIDI data on here, I would recommend just starting with stereo 2. I should also say that you can of course rename these to whatever you like. So I could rename stereo 2 to my piano, and that should still work. Yes, and so you can of course set up a very complicated, or as complicated a system here as you like. I'll just show you a couple of other things where this might be useful, or some other things you might be able to do with this. So let's create a stereo audio track, a MIDI track, and also a stereo aux track. Because of course, instead of just routing this back to the instrument track, you could route this to an audio track. So if we say take stereo 3 here, and if we record enable that and input monitor here, you could now, for example, if you were bouncing at stems or something like that, you could record audio data into here. Similarly, you could do the same with an aux input. You could also combine a MIDI track and an aux input. That, of course, is basically what an instrument track is just a combination of those two. However, with the MIDI track, you need to set the output. So if we come in here, we select, say, channel 5, that should be for the taikos. Record enable that. You'll see it coming on the taikos, and then you could say route it from the MIDI track to an aux track on the other side. So stereo 5. That might be handy. So if you were, say, ganging, I don't know, a whole bunch of string parts together to like blend libraries or something, if you were blending, or if you were routing them all to a specific stereo output, you could then have them all come in on an aux track like that. I hope this was helpful for you. It was a bit rambly in the end. I do apologize for that. If you've got any questions, do leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks very much for watching.